Antonio Buehler is the founder of the Peaceful Streets Project in Central Texas, an all-volunteer grassroots effort committed to ending the institutional violence taking place on our streets. Through community organizing and direct action tactics, Peaceful Streets Project seeks to support communities in understanding, exercising, and standing up for their rights. After being arrested in Austin for lawfully videotaping a brutal pig thug cop stop, Antonio formed the Peaceful Streets Project website. He conducts seminars around the country to educate citizens on how to handle themselves during a police stop. He was just unlawfully arrested again by outlaw cops for videotaping them in the performance of their public duties. Antonio graduated the U.S. Military Academy at West Point. He is a veteran of both the Kosovo and Iraq wars. Antonio Buehler, it is my sincere pleasure to welcome you to the Global Freedom Report. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Thanks for being with us. How did you become involved in police abuse issues?
So I was already active as an activist dealing with the Ron Paul revolution, anti-war issues, and education issues, but I never really spent much time focused on police accountability. It wasn't until I was arrested on New Year's Day, as you alluded to, essentially for trying to take pictures and asking questions of two police officers who were abusing a female who had committed no crime and posed no threat to anyone in our society. They turned on me, started pushing me around, and then they filed a felonious charge of harassment of a public official, which means spitting on a cop, which is a third-degree felony, along with a misdemeanor of resisting arrest. And I was doing out of self-preservation initially, just trying to get witnesses to step forward, and through that process, a bunch of witnesses stepped forward, including one with video, and things changed drastically, and the media got on our side, and people started to rally behind us. And then I saw this as a way to help out all the people who didn't have all the benefits that I did in this situation to try to do something about police abuse. So we launched the Peaceful Streets Project with an intent of changing the culture here in Austin and throughout the country to question the actions of police, to not automatically give them undue authority and respect, to stand up for our rights, and to document interactions between the police and the people so we can protect other people who become victims of police abuse.
Well, you've certainly made your mark. You've certainly had your effect. Before we get into the topic, you mentioned you're part of the Ron Paul revolution. I need to ask you our question for the week, which is, what do you think should be done about the GOP refusing to see duly elected Ron Paul delegates at the National Convention?
Well, what can be done? I mean, we can file lawsuits until our face turns blue, but that's not going to change anything. And by the time it does change anything, it's going to be too late. I think that this experience has really highlighted how little our voice and how little our opinion matters to the establishment. And I'm not saying that we should support the Democrats, but what I'm saying is that, at least for me personally, I'm not going to be supporting the Republican Party, and I'm not going to give them any more of my time or effort, and I'm going to support third-party candidates, through a means of protesting. And I think that the Republican Party should suffer the consequences for what they've done, and I believe that that means that they should not have any shot at winning the White House.
All right. Appreciate your sentiment on that. I know a lot of people are going to feel that way as well. But I got to tell you, in all honesty, doing nothing seems like it's wrong. Also, just sitting there and saying, "Well, there's nothing we can do." It grates on me every time I watch that video of that pig sitting there saying that the ayes have it, there being no objections. Mm-hmm. I'm really a peaceful guy, but I want to do something real violent to this man.
Right.
It's
well, what? Yeah, and good luck with that, because even the threat of that can get you thrown in prison for a long time. But what we can do is we can start engaging in direct action. We can start taking into our own hands our own lives. We can start to reject the institutions which hold us down. And that's something that we're doing in Austin a lot, is we're trying to find alternative means of governing ourselves and of solving our own social problems so that we no longer need to rely on the government and in the process, hopefully get to a point where we can reject the entire idea that we are subject to the state, and we can go ahead and essentially claim our sovereignty from the government. And if we have enough people and enough power, and we play enough, in the local arena, we can get them to at least acknowledge who we are and they're different from us.
All right, hang on a second. My guest is Antonio Buehler with the Peaceful Streets Project. I want to know if your experience as a veteran factored into your decision to establish the Peaceful Streets Project and take the stands you've taken around police abuse.
Yeah, other people have asked me that. I don't think so. I think that my leadership experience that I got through the military was helpful as far as organizing people, and a lot of the leadership experience I had in the military was very non-conventional or unconventional. So I think that was good because we were working with such a diverse group of people. But I also have been blessed with a lot of great activists helping me launch this. But, there's a lot of problems with the military, and one of the problems with the military is that it really enforces this idea of worshiping the state and extreme hyper-nationalism, which can be dangerous. And when that spills over into the police force, the same things that kids are being taught, conditioned, always trust the police, call the police when you're in trouble, the police are your friends, that it really distorts the perception of the public relative to incidents of police abuse. So I think that a lot more important to me was my father just teaching me that you don't abuse women, that you stand up and you do what's right. And perhaps some of the stuff that I learned at West Point, the whole duty, honor, country stuff. But, I don't really give my military experience that much credit, with regards to the way I acted on New Year's Day or the launching of the Peaceful Streets Project. And there's a lot of amazing people who are helping me with it, not one of which is a veteran.
Whenever I speak with someone about police abuse, I almost always hear the mantra that it's a few bad cops. Most policemen and policewomen are good. However, the number of reports of police violating citizens' rights has increased exponentially over the past several years. Is it really only a few bad cops, or is there something more insidious going on in Austin and around the country?
Yeah, I think it's something more insidious without question. And just look at what happened here in Austin, right? You have these two really bad actors, these two bad cops, and I think that's fair to say that they don't represent every cop on the force. However, since then, we have not heard of one police officer coming out and saying that they stand with the victims, that they do not support what these two have done. The police chief, the entire chain of command, the public affairs person, they all fully back the police of these two criminal cops, even though there's overwhelming evidence that I'm innocent, the female victim is innocent, and that the cops were the ones who committed criminal acts. Internal Affairs conducted an investigation that was a total sham. They deliberately distorted chronology. They deliberately distorted testimony. They refused to interview the two most important witnesses, the two closest witnesses next to the person who was actually filming that night that wasn't involved in the actual stop. And, good cops turn in bad cops. Good cops will arrest cops who are engaged in criminal acts, and we haven't seen that yet. So maybe not all cops are bad cops, but we're still waiting for the good cops to really step up and do something. It's nice when we see cops doing their duty, respectfully and not abusing people or being kind and cordial when they're talking to you. But the good cops turn in the bad cops and arrest the bad cops, and we're still waiting for that to happen.
According to Supreme Court rulings, a citizen has the right to resist with whatever force necessary an unlawful arrest. Yet, we are told that you can't resist arrest. They constantly charge people with resisting arrest. It's their default charge when they have nothing else to do. What are your thoughts on resisting an unlawful arrest?
Yeah. Well, there's been numerous cases, more than anyone can even count, of people who were innocent who were wrongly stopped by the police, attacked by the police, beaten by police, or even killed by police, and the cops came back, and with nothing else on the table, no crime committed, they claimed resisting arrest as a way to validate what they had done. And it's a shame. I was charged with resisting arrest along with a felony of spitting on a cop, and I think it's completely bogus. However, there's a difficult situation there because normally if someone who's an armed thug is going to engage in the act of violently assaulting you, you as a human being should have the right to defend yourself and use all necessary means to defend yourself from that violent criminal. But when it comes to the police, if you do that, you're going to end up in prison a very long time, or you're going to end up dead. And that's just the basic fact of the matter. And unless everyone in the country were willing to all, get on board and say we're going to resist all actions by the police, you're just going to have a bunch of martyrs. And I don't encourage that. So it's an unfortunate situation. That's the problem when you have a state with a monopoly on power. They get away with things that you as an individual just could never get away with. But our way of dealing with that is we're trying to arm people with the means to document their behavior, to further erode the public trust in corrupt institutions, and to get people to start, retaking authority over their own lives and rejecting this institution of violence.
One of the most frequent situations that's been occurring all over the country has seen citizens arrested for videotaping or otherwise recording police while they are performing their duties. Considering they are public servants, it would seem to me that citizens have the right to record them, that they do not enjoy freedom from public scrutiny. Yet, these arrests continued. I believe you were recently victimized for this reason. What is your group doing to combat this egregious violation by thug cops of fundamental rights and personal freedom?
Well, we're exposing them, and that's what we're going to keep doing. We're going to keep videotaping them, and the more thuggish they are, the more out of control they are, the more that we'll film them, and the more that their trust is going to be eroded. It's a really messed up situation when you have cops who are supposed to uphold the Constitution, who deliberately act in a manner which intentionally undermines your constitutional rights. And what happened to me on Sunday morning was exactly that. Because I was videotaping, I got arrested. And in fact, the person I was videotaping was actually the undercover cop that I had exposed a couple days earlier for engaging in an undercover police activity. And that's the one who arrested me. And it was clearly a personal vendetta against me in conjunction with a coordinated campaign by the Austin Police Department to try to malign me and make me look like a bad person in the eyes of the public in advance of my grand jury for the New Year's Day incident.
What about police brutality? I just got a story about a nurse in Los Angeles who was stopped by a cop. She admitted that she badmouthed him, but in return, he beat her up mercilessly. The photos of her injuries are sickening.
And it happens every day in America. That's the thing. And most people don't know about it because the people that they abuse are often people who have no voice, whether they be transients, whether they be minorities, whether they be people with priors, or people who just don't want to make an issue out of it because they have a professional career and they figure if they just go ahead and take a plea, and pay a bunch of money, that it'll go away and they can move on with their lives. The police abuse situation in America is sickening. It's a situation that happens anytime you give any institution a monopoly on power and the ability to take away someone's life without repercussions. Anyone can look up the Stanford prison experiment for the underlying psychological reasons why this happens. But yeah, it's pervasive, and it's not just in big cities like Austin and Chicago and LA and New York, but it's happening in small towns across America too. And the idea that we have public servants out there who are protecting and serving us is a complete farce. People just need to look at sort of the ledger of how many times people are helped by the police and protected by the police versus how many times their lives are destroyed or taken away by the police. And no objective, reasonable person could ever come away from such a calculus, from looking at that sort of ledger, and come away and believe that, by any means do we need cops to protect us, because it's quite the opposite. Less cops would mean more safety and more security and more liberty.
There's a famous story called the Battle of Athens, meaning Athens, Tennessee. in McMinn County. Back in June of 1946, there was a election, and for years there had been a corrupt sheriff and corrupt state senator who'd been switching positions. For one term, one of them would be senator, one would be sheriff, and they'd switch the next term. And, the corruption was so bad that deputies actually shot a black man for refusing to get out of line when he was standing in line to vote. The man lived, but the corruption was horrible. The way it ended was a bunch of soldiers, fresh back from World War II, who said, we didn't fight Hitler to come back and have this stuff. They held the sheriff at siege. They actually shot anyone who tried to leave the sheriff's office. They ultimately used force of arms to arrest the sheriff and to turn him over to the state authorities. They invalidated all of the ballots that were corrupted by the corrupt sheriff, and they won the election, and they went on to clean up the region. Now, you came out of West Point, which is supposed to be the pinnacle of military training. You were in Kosovo. You were in Iraq. Why don't we get a bunch of veterans together and start slapping handcuffs on these pig thug cops and arresting them?
Well, that's a good question. Number one, you would need to have the coordinated efforts of lots of people to do it, and it would, unless you can get a mass movement to do it, you're going to end up, in a slaughter situation.
But we have millions of veterans, and you folks are trained not only in terms of how to do this, but also in terms of supposed to be protecting the Constitution, of which this is obviously a violation. So why can't we get a bunch of veterans together to actually stop this? That's what I don't understand.
Well, I think that one of the number one issues with that is that veterans don't inherently want to protect the Constitution. Now, there are lots of veterans who do. There are the Oath Keepers out there, and I love Oath Keepers, but that's a minority, and when push comes to shove in our country, I don't know if the veterans and the military would side with the people against the government. We have a really bad track record of that in this nation, and universally. They tend to side with the state. So that's number one. Number two is, there are a lot of different hypotheticals that we could talk about as to ways that we can try to fix the system. For Peaceful Streets Project in particular, we are focused on non-violent means, direct action, trying to change the culture and getting people to reject the state as opposed to violently fight the state, because we're not trying to convince anyone to get slaughtered, right? The Battle of Athens, they were able to defer to the state government and turn some of these people over. Today, if anyone tried to rise up against their sheriff or their local government, you'd have the feds come in, with tanks and drones and helicopters, and they would get slaughtered. So I think it's a much tougher situation now than it was back then, and a lot. And I would assume that there's less people that are armed, even though we have 300 million weapons in the United States. So it's a tough call. I know for me, my personal stance on it is I encourage nonviolent means of resistance.
I want to ask you about training. You're a military man. You understand the value and the import of training. To what degree does training of cops play a part, or the training they receive play a part in these ongoing violations that we've been discussing?
Well, I think it's big. I think that there's definitely a level of indoctrination that is part of their training when they go through the academy. I think that just like in the military, training only gets so far, and it's the daily interactions that you have with your commanders and your leaders and your peers that really dictate your actions, in the battlefield or wherever it may be. And in the police organizations today, the thin blue line really encourages misbehavior, and they push a really negative culture where they view the people, the citizens, as the enemy, and they encourage it, and they talk about and they participate in actions that are intended to punish people who are guilty of contempt of cops, punish people who have the audacity to stand up to the cops, and frame people in an effort to protect criminal cops. And when you have a culture such as there is in the Austin Police Department, where everyone all the way up to the chief of police and internal affairs will go to great lengths to cover what is without question criminal activity by cops on minor issues, you know that they're going to go really, really far when it comes to the cops doing some pretty heinous stuff. So I think that training is really important, and they're certainly not getting much training with regards to ethics, or what their code is, their code of conduct, or their oath to the Constitution. But it's the day in, day out, the veterans telling the younger people how to set people up, how to punish them, how to justify lethal force or violent action. That is also a big problem.
Far more often than not, thug cops get away with their brutal and unlawful activities. Often the district attorney or the chief of police will say that they only followed proper police procedure, or that they feared for their safety, and that justified their actions. For example, recently a New York judge was brutalized when he tried to stop a cop from beating up a citizen. The DA refused to press charges against the terrorist cop. Now this all sounds ominously akin to, "I am only following orders," which the Nazis used as their excuse for the atrocities they committed. Aren't there any options left for citizens when a DA refuses to prosecute a cop for the crimes he commits?
Well, it's difficult, and people can always bring civil suit, but the state has pretty much unlimited funds, and they're willing to throw everything that they have, all the resources necessary, into a defense of criminal cops and their criminal organization. So people can go down the civil suit route, and sometimes they can get wins from that. But at the end of the day, cops still often keep their jobs, even when they cost the taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars in lawsuits. And most often, there is no repercussions that the cops have to face, or that the institution of the state has to face for their actions. So what we're hoping is that we can create a culture change where we get people to reject the notion that we even need this monopoly force on power and force, essentially, of the police and of the state, and get them to seek out alternative means of protection, alternative means of dealing with each other. And by doing so, hopefully we can slowly reduce or eliminate, this very violent aspect of our society.
Isn't it true that when cops get away with behavior that if you or I did it would land us in jail, that it encourages them to continue their outlaw acts?
Absolutely. And that's a big problem with this. Even if you believe that somehow the cops should have superior rights, or that when a cop assaults you, that should be something minor, but when you assault a cop, you should be going to prison for a very long time. Even if you actually believe that, which I think is ridiculous, by virtue of having the organization, whether it be the police department, the police association, the justice system, whatever, when they rally behind and protect abusive actions, criminal actions by individual cops, that will perpetuate, that will really breed a culture which is only going to lead to worse things down the line. And I admit that I'm extremely fortunate in my situation. I didn't get violently beat up. He tried to dislocate my arm. They threw me to the ground, but I didn't get shot. I didn't get broken bones, broken ribs. I didn't get any lacerations. I'm extremely fortunate. But my situation would have been markedly different had I been in a different part of town, had I been in a different race, had I been in the car that was pulled over. There's a million different reasons that would have led to me being violently beat up or even killed. And it happens all the time. And because people like Aborski and Snyder get away with the crimes that they do, that leads on to really bad situations where cops not oftentimes, but sometimes rape and kill people and get away with it. And, if we had people of courage, integrity, and honor in office and in these positions of authority and in chain of command, they would be cracking down on this stuff to protect the people. But they don't care about protecting the people. The law enforcement agencies in this country do not exist to protect us. They exist to control us and to extract money from us.
And see, that leads right into my next question. I know we kind of touched on this, but I need to put it another way. If the judicial system refuses to convict cops who murder citizens, if the administrators of the law refuse to prosecute cops who brutalize innocent people or shoot bystanders, if the legislature refuses to pass laws making cops personally liable for their actions, then what is left for the people to do but arm themselves? What does the soldier in you think?
Well, I think everyone should arm themselves, quite frankly, because you never know when you're going to have to protect yourself. And if you're in a situation where a criminal cop is doing something illegal and trying to take your life from you, and it's not in the duties of the office, people are going to have to make that decision whether or not they want to defend themselves or if they just want to, be taken away from this earth by a criminal cop. Now, I personally encourage nonviolence, and I encourage that that we resist the police, without resorting to force. And I think that every single time that someone tries to fight back against the police, one, they're going to end up dead, and two, you give a stronger argument, unfortunately, in our collectivist society that we need to disarm the people, and we need to go to greater lengths to protect these cops from these very, very rare occasions where people fight back. My personal preference, and where I think we're going to have the most powerful impact is not through violent means, but by simply rejecting the institution that exists and opting out of the system and refusing to participate in it, and refusing to acknowledge their authority, and forcing them to leave us alone, and finding alternative means of protecting ourselves. And I know that's very hard and it's utopian, but I really do believe that any sort of violent approach to dealing with these violent thug cops is only going to strengthen their hand and give them sort of moral superiority, in terms of public opinion.
Yeah, I appreciate what you're saying, and philosophically I'm with you, but the practical reality is if you decide not to play, they'll arrest you. They say, you're not going to do what we say, you're not going to pay our protection, you're not going to do, whatever it is, then we're simply going to take you away and put you away someplace. Forcibly, and if you're not going to resist, then you're all going to end up in prison.
Right. Well, and there's a limit to that. So they can't put everyone in prison. It's just economically infeasible. It's just impossible. So if enough people resist, enough people opt out, and they start saying we're not going to comply anymore, then they're going to be forced to deal with that, through other means. They can't just push us around anymore. And that's what we're trying to do in Austin. We are really trying to build alternative institutions, and we're trying to get the government to acknowledge who we are and just back off and let them know that if we're not harming anyone, that they have no right to come near us, they have no right to bother us, and we'll see if that works. What we do know is that violent means most often leads to just a new dictator or tyrant or totalitarian system taking over. Very rarely has it ever led to more liberty. And my personal stance on it is that I'm going to try to fight this fight through nonviolent means, and I think that we can be successful doing that.
And I hope that you're right. And however, I have to disagree that the American Revolution was extremely violent, and it did for a time lead to greater liberty. That's been corrupted,
right.
But the revolution itself yielded liberty. What kind of results are the Peaceful Streets projects, is the group having?
Well, it's having tremendous success on a number of levels. One is we've educated a lot of people about what their rights are, and they're now flexing those rights. We have encouraged a bunch of people. We gave out 100 cameras, and there's been numerous people who didn't get cameras but who are videotaping with cameras they have or with their phones, who are actually going out into the streets and recording police. And we're changing public opinion. The people who've sort of accepted that there's problems with police abuse have typically been from marginalized communities where the cops have focused a lot of their energy, poor communities, the homeless community, minority communities. But through what we're doing, we've opened up the eyes of a lot of upper class and middle class people here in Austin and throughout the country that police abuse is a problem, and now there's a conversation about it, and people are really getting agitated and upset by the actions of the police. So that's a win. And we're actually having an effect on the police. A lot of these thugs are continuing to do what they're doing, but we've seen a marked difference in the way that cops deal with people when we're around. They're a lot less likely to arrest them. They're a lot less likely to hassle them or to search their vehicle. And that's a win for us as well. So we have seen successes. Thank God we haven't seen a cop killing someone or violently assaulting them beyond the initial arrest and takedown, which we have seen. And hopefully that continues to be the case because it doesn't happen because because they know we're watching. But should that happen, I do hope that there's someone there videotaping, and that will just that will just play right into the continued movement of people waking up and realizing how criminal this organization is and how corrupt any institution of a state with a monopoly on violence and power and force can be.
Does Peaceful Streets Project operate outside the Austin region, and if not, are there similar organizations elsewhere?
Well, copblock.org is an amazing organization that has a bunch of chapters throughout the country, and Peaceful Streets we work in solidarity with them. But Peaceful Streets is also expanding outside of Austin. There are independent Peaceful Streets projects popping up. There's one in Manchester, New Hampshire. There's one in Dallas, Fort Worth that have already launched. And there's probably a dozen other cities that we're talking to right now trying to help them launch Peaceful Streets there. And ideally, what we're going to have it across the nation soon enough where no matter what community you're in, there's going to be at least a few people in that community who are willing to go out and videotape the interactions between the police and the people, or when they see a police come down their street, that they're willing to turn their camera on, so that we can go ahead and continue this fight and change the culture of the people and of the police.
Well, I'll tell you, the pebble that you've thrown into the ocean has an amazing number of ripples that continue to wave out to the rest of the country and hopefully even beyond that. How do people learn more about the Peaceful Streets Project, and how do they become more directly involved?
Well, they can go to peacefulstreets.com. That's our website, and they can go to our YouTube page, Peaceful Streets, or they can go to our Facebook page, facebook.com/peacefulstreets. They can also go to the Free Antonio Buehler group on Facebook, which has a lot of dialogue. If they want to get involved, if they are in Central Texas, they can go ahead and contact us directly. And if they want to set up a new chapter, they can do the same, and we'll definitely help them. We can be reached at peacefulstreets@gmail.com. And we have some financial backing. We're trying to set up the 501c3 as quickly as possible, but we have some potential financial backing, which will allow us to directly assist new chapters setting up and going ahead and launching their first annual conference and being able to help them along that path. And it's amazing. There are people from across the country who are really passionate about fighting police abuse, and a lot of the organizations that are already in existence, they focus in on certain populations, or they focus in on legislative action or political action, and there's not a lot of people dealing with direct action. So I think that we're going to have a lot of support, financial and otherwise, that can help us help other people. So I encourage everyone to reach out to us.
Excellent. Watch out for those 501c3s, though. My guest has been Antonio Buehler of the Peaceful Streets Project, www.peacefulstreets.com. I wish you the best, Antonio. Thanks so much, and keep up the great work.
All right. Thank you.